I stood in the quiet of my late husband's old room, brushing dust from a wedding photo we hadn't looked at in years. His letter, creased at the corners, soft with time, sat open in my lap. I read his words again like they were being spoken to me now. If you ever forget who you are, come back to where you began. That night I packed a box. Inside was the $9 scarf my son and his wife gave me for Mother's Day. The one they handed me while gifting a $12,000 bag. Bought with my money. To her mother. No anger. No explanation. Just a note that read, "You made your choices. So did I." And that was the day I quietly began choosing myself again. I still remember the quiet that settled over the house after my husband passed away. How it wrapped around me like a heavy shawl I hadn't asked for. For the past 10 years, I lived in that silence alone, but not unloved. I had Lucas. He was my reason for rising every morning, for making meals even when I had no appetite, for staying afloat when I wanted to let the grief pull me under. I was a mother, and that had to be enough. People used to ask why I never remarried. "You're still young, Colleen," they'd say. "Don't you want companionship?" But I couldn't bear the thought of bringing a stepfather into Lucas's life. He'd already lost so much. I didn't want him to feel like he had to share me with anyone else. I gave him my whole heart, undivided and without condition. Raising him alone wasn't easy. There were times when I worked double shifts at the hospital, then came home to help with science fair projects and college applications. I was exhausted more often than not, but I wore that fatigue like a badge of honor. He got into a great university, and I was so proud I cried through the entire orientation. When Lucas and Madison got engaged, I did everything I could to help them start their life together. I sold the little lakeside cottage I'd inherited from my parents, the only place I had left that felt like home, to give them the down payment for their house. I signed as a guarantor on their mortgage. I didn't hesitate. That's what mothers do, I thought. That's what love looks like. For a while I felt welcomed. Madison would invite me over, ask for recipes, even thank me in her bridal shower speech. But slowly, things changed. She started planning family events without consulting me. Lucas stopped calling as often. Holidays that once belonged to the two of us, small, meaningful dinners, became gatherings I was added to at the last minute. I noticed the shift, of course. The way Madison took over conversations made decisions for both of them. I'd sit across from Lucas and see him glance toward her before answering even the simplest questions. But I told myself it was natural. Newlyweds need space. He's just busy. I repeated it so often it almost sounded true. Mother's Day was always special between us. He'd take me to brunch, give me a card with his messy handwriting, and remind me that everything he owed to me. But this year, the invitation came in a white envelope with my name typed. No handwritten note, no personal touch. It was sent by his assistant, not Lucas. Still, I got dressed. I chose a soft blue blouse Lucas once complimented. I wrapped the small gifts I'd picked out for Madison and her mother, Victoria. A hand-painted teacup for Madison, and a lavender sachet set for Victoria. I didn't want anyone to feel left out. Even if they barely noticed me, I noticed them. As I tied the ribbon around Victoria's gift, I paused. I remembered the year Lucas made me breakfast in bed with scrambled eggs that tasted like pepper and love. I remembered when he cried before leaving for college, holding on to me like he was 5 again. I used to believe those memories would always mean something. But lately I couldn't help but wonder if I'd become a ghost in my own family. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just displaced. Like someone who once mattered now sitting at the edge of a photograph no one remembered taking. Still, I smiled as I placed the gifts in my bag and prepared to go. Because that's what mothers do. We show up, even when no one remembers inviting us. the day of the Mother's Day luncheon arrived with more nerves than excitement. The invitation hadn't included an exact address, just the name of a country club I'd never visited before. I had to look it up online, missed the first turn, and ended up arriving 15 minutes late. When I stepped into the grand dining hall, my eyes scanned the room for a familiar face. I saw Lucas standing near the head table, deep in conversation with Madison and her mother, Victoria. A staff member approached, and before I could even say my name, ushered me toward a small, round table near the back, closer to the swinging doors of the kitchen than the center of the room. I sat down quietly, my gift bag nestled on my lap, like a comfort blanket. From where I sat, I could barely hear the speeches being made, but I could see Victoria's smile as Lucas introduced her with pride, calling her the most elegant woman he knows. I smiled too, even though it stung. I wondered if he'd forgotten all the mornings I rushed to his soccer games with unbrushed hair and wrinkled shirts, just to cheer him on from the sidelines. I used to be elegant once, I thought. Or at least I tried to be. On my budget, in my own way. The meal began. Servers in pressed white uniforms placed plates of lemon chicken and wild rice in front of us. The other women at my table chatted about grandkids and vacation homes. No one asked who I was or why I sat alone. Then came the gift presentation. Madison stood and made a small speech about gratitude and motherhood. Lucas took the mic and called Victoria forward. "For the woman who taught Madison how to love with grace," he said, reaching beneath the table to reveal a sleek orange box. "You deserve nothing less." Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, feigning surprise, but I could tell she knew. She unwrapped the ribbon slowly, then held up a Chanel handbag. Soft cream leather, the kind you don't wear, you display. I could hear the appreciative gasps from the main table. I lowered my eyes and touched the handles of the gift bag I'd brought. I didn't expect anything extravagant. A handwritten note, maybe. A picture of us together. Something with a memory in it. Madison finally reached my table, placing a flat box wrapped in tissue paper in front of me. "We know you don't like flashy things," she said, her voice a bit too sweet. "So we got you something simple." I peeled back the tissue. It was a scarf, thin, synthetic pale pink with fraying edges. The clearance tag still clung to it. $9.99. I looked up, unsure how to react. Madison had already walked away. No one clapped. No one said anything. I tucked the scarf back in its box, my fingers trembling. I didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers. Dinner continued. Lucas made a toast and poured champagne. Only for those at the main table. I watched as he leaned toward Victoria and said, "Thank you for teaching Madison how to be such an incredible wife and mother. I'm lucky to have you." I stared down at my plate, my appetite gone. I tried to cut into the chicken, but the knife shook in my hand. I chewed slowly, swallowed carefully, but every bite felt like a stone. No one mentioned me in a speech. No one raised a glass in my direction. I didn't exist in that room. Not as a mother, not as someone who'd given up a lifetime for her son. I was just there. When I got home, I placed the scarf on the kitchen counter and made a cup of tea I never drank. The silence in my house was louder that night. I opened my laptop needing a distraction and decided to check my bank account, just to make sure Madison hadn't charged dinner to my card. What I found hit harder than anything I'd felt that day. A transaction dated 3 days prior, $12,000. Spent at a luxury boutique on Oak Street. The exact date Lucas had mentioned he was handling the Mother's Day gift. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. My name was still on the card he used, an old account I'd let him keep access to for emergencies. I never thought he'd use it without asking. And certainly not for this. The Chanel bag. That beautiful, gleaming token of appreciation. Paid for by me. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. Then I looked at the scarf. It lay there limp and forgettable, like something tossed into a cart last minute on the way to the register. My son had given me a $9 scarf and handed his mother-in-law a $12,000 purse bought with my money. I wasn't heartbroken. Not yet. I was just hollow. Like something had quietly slipped out of me and I wasn't sure I could get it back. The morning after Mother's Day, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The scarf still lay where I'd left it untouched. I hadn't thrown it away. I wasn't that kind of person. But I hadn't put it away either. It felt like a symbol of something deeper, something I couldn't quite bring myself to look at directly. I opened my laptop, telling myself I was only going to pay the utility bill, maybe distract myself with a few recipe blogs. But my fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Instead, I logged into my online banking account. It wasn't a habit. In fact, I rarely checked that account anymore. Years ago, I'd added Lucas as an authorized user on one of my credit cards, just in case of emergencies. He was still in grad school then, and I wanted him to feel secure. When he got married, I never canceled it. Somehow it felt symbolic, like I was still needed. But as I scrolled through the recent transactions, my stomach tightened. 3 large purchases caught my eye, each over $1,000. One of them made me freeze a $12,000 charge at a luxury boutique on Oak Street, dated just 4 days before the Mother's Day luncheon. That was the same day Lucas had texted running errands. Can't call now. I remember it because I had offered to help pick up centerpieces for the party, and he brushed me off. I clicked into the transaction details. Chanel Boutique, Oak Street. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't pound, not yet. It just sank slowly like a stone in water. I opened a new tab and typed in Madison's Instagram handle. Her account had gone from private to public a few months ago. She'd started calling herself a lifestyle mom, whatever that meant. As I scrolled past airbrushed photos of candles and charcuterie boards, I saw it. A picture of Victoria beaming, holding the exact handbag Lucas had presented at the luncheon. Cream leather gold chain, the signature CC logo gleaming under soft patio lighting. The caption read, "Nothing but the best for the best mother-in-law. Thank you for raising the love of my life with such elegance." I felt the blood drain from my face. There it was. Proof. Not just of the gift, but of the lie. That purse wasn't bought with Lucas's money. It was bought with mine. I closed the laptop slowly. My mind raced, trying to find any reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Madison had used the wrong card, but deep down, I knew better. Madison didn't make mistakes like that. She was too deliberate, too polished. I picked up the phone and called the bank. The customer service representative confirmed it. My name was still the primary on that account, and the charges had gone through using the card I'd given Lucas nearly 3 years ago. It had never been canceled. Never limited. I thanked her and hung up, hands shaking. I didn't call Lucas right away. I couldn't. Instead, I stared out the window at the garden I'd let go wild last fall. Weeds tangled with hydrangeas. Just like my thoughts. Something once tended, now overrun. The next day, I called him. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady. "Hi, sweetheart. I was wondering if we could catch up sometime this week. Just the 2 of us." He sounded distracted. "This week's a bit packed." Maybe next I pushed gently. "It's been a while, Lucas." He sighed. "Yeah, I know. I'll check with Madison." Maybe Sunday afternoon Sunday came and went. He canceled. Said Madison wasn't feeling well. No reschedule. No apology. That night I received a text from Madison. "Hey, Colleen. Hope you're doing okay. Just wanted to say, please don't stress yourself out. There's no need to go digging into small things. Let's all just keep the peace, okay? No greeting. No punctuation. No warmth." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out an old notebook from my filing cabinet and began a list. May 9th, 12,000 Chanel Oak Street. April 22nd, 1-800 Madison Jewelry. March 31st, 3. 200. Spa Lumiere. All from the same card. All from the same account I had nearly forgotten existed. All in the past 2 months. I went to the printer and made copies of each statement. I organized them neatly into a folder. For what I didn't know yet. But I needed to feel like I was doing something. Like I still had a say in what happened to the life I'd built. I called it my quiet file. Because if no one was going to speak up for me, I would do it. Softly but clearly. I didn't know what the next step was. But I knew now that silence wouldn't protect me. It never had. I chose a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. One of those places where time seemed to slow down, where the clinking of mugs and the low hum of jazz made even the hardest conversations feel a little softer. I hadn't been there in years, not since Lucas was in college. Back then, we used to come here after movie nights, splitting a lemon tart and laughing at each other's bad taste in films. I thought maybe the setting might help soften what I had to say. I arrived early and picked a corner table by the window. The spring light poured in, casting long golden streaks across the wood. I ordered 2 coffees, his with cream, mine, black, and waited. My hands rested on the manila folder in front of me, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Lucas walked in 10 minutes late, dressed in a pressed shirt, distracted by his phone. He looked more like a client meeting a colleague than a son visiting his mother. When he finally sat down, he gave me a quick smile like an afterthought. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" I offered a smile back. Tight, unsure. I just wanted to talk. About something important. He nodded, leaning back, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Sure, but I've only got about half an hour. Madison has a thing later." I slid the folder toward him. "I've been going over some bank statements. Transactions from the account I added you to a few years ago." His expression didn't change, but his fingers tensed slightly around his coffee cup. "There's a charge for $12,000 at Chanel," I continued, voice even. On the same day, Madison received her Mother's Day gift. He blinked slowly, then gave a shrug that felt too practiced. "Oh, yeah. That might have been a mistake. Madison probably used the wrong card." A mistake, I asked, keeping my tone gentle. 3 separate charges. 1 for jewelry, 1 for a spa, and then the purse. All in the past 2 months. All from the same card. "That's not an accident, Lucas." He shifted in his seat, the charm on his face starting to crack. "Mom, I don't manage every single detail of our expenses, okay? Maybe something slipped. It's not a big deal." I took a slow breath. It is a big deal when it's my money. When it's used without my knowledge. I gave you that card for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. He rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes at me. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "I'm asking you to respect my boundaries," I said softly. "And I'd like to remove you from the account. From all of them." The temperature at the table dropped. He sat up straight, his voice sharper. "Seriously, you're really doing this over a handbag. It's not about the handbag," I said barely above a whisper. "It's about trust. About how I felt opening a $9 scarf alone while watching your mother-in-law be handed something I unknowingly paid for." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked back at me with something colder in his eyes. "Madison wants to know what's taking so long." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He didn't even flinch. "Tell her we're finishing up," I said. He stood suddenly without touching his coffee. "If you can't trust us, maybe you shouldn't be involved in our finances at all." And, with that, he walked out. I sat there for a while listening to the muffled conversations around me. My coffee had gone cold. I stared at the mug, then at the chair across from me, still slightly pulled out as if he might come back. He didn't. That night I opened my email and found a message from Lucas. "Mom, if you feel you can't trust Madison and me, perhaps it's best you take a step back from our finances entirely. We've always appreciated your support, but we need space to build our life on our own terms. Lucas. No love. No talk soon. Just business." I reread it 3 times. Each word stung more than the last. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lie. It was the way he distanced himself, casually, like I was an outdated subscription he no longer needed. That night I cried. Not because of the purse. Not even because of the scarf. I cried because the boy I raised, the one who used to slip handmade cards under my pillow, who once promised he'd never let anyone come between us, was gone. Replaced by someone who saw me as a bank account. As a complication. As a burden. I didn't sleep much. But somewhere between midnight and sunrise, I stopped asking why. And I started thinking about what came next. The morning after Lucas walked out of that cafe, I sat in my living room, wrapped in the same cardigan I wore when he was born. It was threadbare now, but familiar. Safe. I cradled a cup of tea I hadn't touched and stared at nothing in particular. The silence in the house had changed. It used to feel peaceful. Now it felt like the kind of quiet that follows a slammed door. I don't know how long I sat like that before I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a while, but one I still knew by heart. Maggie and I had been friends since our nursing school days. She was the only person left in my life who still remembered Lucas as a baby, who knew the weight of motherhood from the inside out. When she picked up, she didn't say hello like most people. She said, "What happened?" And I broke. I told her everything. The scarf. The purse. The charges on my account. The cafe. The email. She didn't interrupt. Not once. Just let me pour it all out until I had nothing left but silence and the sound of her soft breathing on the other end. Then she spoke, her voice low and certain. "Colleen, you gave that boy everything. But the moment he forgot who you are, that's when you stop giving. That's when you start reclaiming." I tried to joke to keep it light. "Reclaiming what am I?" "Storming a castle." She didn't laugh. "Yes." "And you're the queen." Then she told me something I didn't expect. Years ago, Maggie's daughter had used her name to take out a $20,000 loan. Bought a car, never paid it back. Maggie didn't press charges, but she did something else. Something bold. She sold the car while her daughter was on vacation, paid off the loan, and rewrote her will the very next day. "I didn't do it to be cruel," she said. "I did it to remind myself that I mattered. That my name meant something. That sentence stuck with me. That my name meant something. I'd forgotten what that felt like. To believe my name had weight beyond motherhood, beyond sacrifice. That I was more than someone's support system. I had become so used to being the one behind the curtain, I didn't know what it meant to step out onto the stage. Maggie offered to drive me to see her lawyer, a woman named Elaine Carter. "Sharp as a tack," Maggie said. "And kind enough not to make you feel stupid for waiting this long." I made the appointment. Elaine's office was in a converted craftsman house downtown. Nothing cold or corporate, just warm wood floors, soft lighting, and a receptionist who offered me lemon water like I was someone important. Elaine was in her early 50s, glasses perched on her nose, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She didn't waste time with small talk. Once I explained the situation, she nodded and flipped open a yellow legal pad. "First, we remove all secondary users from your accounts," she said. "Change passwords. Set up two-factor authentication. You'll be surprised how many mothers forget they even gave access." I gave a small laugh, mostly out of embarrassment. I didn't forget. I just didn't want to take it back. It felt mean. Elaine looked me square in the eyes. "What's mean is letting someone turn your kindness into a withdrawal system." She was right. "Next," she continued, "we'll draft a new will. Clean. Clear. No ambiguity. If you want your assets to go to someone else, niece friend scholarship fund, we'll make it legally airtight." I hesitated. "Does it have to be family?" She smiled. "It has to be someone you trust." That's when I thought of Emma. Emma Carter. No relation to Elaine, though. The name coincidence made me smile. Was a young woman I'd mentored through a local community program. She'd grown up in the foster system, worked 2 jobs through college, and never once asked me for anything, even when she had every reason to. I'd quietly paid for her textbooks 1 semester after overhearing her cry in a hallway. Emma had once called me her godmother in spirit. I hadn't realized until that moment how much those words meant to me. "Yes," I said to Elaine. "I want Emma to be part of it." We spent 2 hours drafting documents, outlining accounts, establishing a small foundation fund in my name. Nothing grand, just a quiet legacy. Something I could leave behind that had meaning. When I walked out of that office, I felt different. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just steady. I stopped at a bakery on the way home and bought myself a croissant. The clerk asked if I wanted it warmed. I said yes. I ate it sitting in my car, the sun shining through the windshield, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a forgotten afterthought. I felt like someone reclaiming her name. That evening I took the scarf, the $9 scarf, and placed it in a shoebox. I wrote a small note and slipped it inside. "You made your choices." So did I. Then I addressed the box to Lucas and set it near the door for tomorrow's mail. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. Because finally I wasn't reacting to what had been done to me. I was responding for myself. The changes began on a Thursday morning. There was no announcement. No dramatic confrontation. No raised voices or slammed doors. Just a quiet breath, a steady hand, and a laptop screen that lit up with calm resolve. I logged into every account Lucas had ever touched. Banking credit cards, investment portfolios. I moved slowly, carefully, as if untying knots that had been wrapped too tightly for too long. I revoked his access, canceled the supplementary card he had used so freely, and changed every password I could remember once sharing. The final transaction was the hardest. I called the lawyer's office and asked Elaine to initiate the formal freeze on all shared financial assets. No text. No email to Lucas. Just a signed legal letter sent directly from her desk. Let him learn the news from someone who wouldn't stutter or apologize on my behalf. Later that afternoon, I met with Elaine in person to finalize the new will. The old one, drafted back when I still believed love was enough to guarantee loyalty, was shredded right there in her office. It had named Lucas and Madison as my primary heirs, with everything split equally between them. The new one was different. Emma Carter would be the sole beneficiary. A scholarship fund would be established in my name, designed to support young women who had been financially abandoned by family or partners. My home, my savings, and even my pension. All of it would go to people who hadn't expected it, who hadn't taken it for granted. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of clarity. That night I removed myself from the family group chat. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a quiet exit. I blocked notifications from Lucas and Madison's social media accounts. Their posts, once tiny needles, would no longer have the power to pierce me. I turned my attention to the bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had stayed closed since my husband passed. Dust floated in the air as I opened the door. The light was soft, muted like memory. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside, I found the letter he wrote me on our 20th anniversary. The edges were yellowing, but the words were still strong. If I'm not there one day, I hope you still remember who you are without me. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. That weekend, I boxed the scarf. The one Lucas and Madison had gifted me for Mother's Day, the one I never wore. I folded it neatly, placed it in a plain white box, and wrote 7 words on a slip of paper. You made your choices. So did I. I sealed the package and addressed it to their home. No return label. A few days later, I began taking walks in the neighborhood again. Nothing long, just a slow stroll around the block in the cool air. My neighbors waved more than usual. Mrs. Jennings across the street commented that I looked lighter somehow. I thanked her and didn't explain. I started sitting on the porch in the afternoons with a cup of tea, letting the breeze stir the hem of my skirt and the leaves of the potted basil by the door. There was a peace to it, an uncluttered sort of silence, the kind you grow into. Then the phone calls began. Lucas called twice on Monday, 4 times on Tuesday. I watched each one flash across the screen, then fade. I didn't block him. That would have been noise. Instead, I chose silence. On Wednesday, he left a voicemail. His voice was tense. Clipped, Mom. I think there's something wrong with the account. I can't access the cards. Can you call me back? I didn't. Thursday, he tried again. Seriously, I need to talk to you. This isn't okay. Still, I said nothing. Madison sent a message short and sharp. You've made things unnecessarily complicated. Hope you're happy. I didn't respond. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not explain yourself. Sometimes dignity looks like restraint. In the quiet that followed, I started to hear myself again. My own thoughts. My own wants. My own name, not echoed through someone else's needs. I used to think silence was the absence of sound. Now I knew better. Silence could be strength. Silence could be freedom. The emails came first. Madison was the one to break the silence. Her message was long, too long, and dressed in the kind of faux empathy that dripped with control. She began with, I hope you're okay, and ended with, let's not turn a small misunderstanding into a family war. Somewhere in between, she called my decision rash, unfair, and emotionally damaging. I read it twice, not out of doubt, but disbelief. There was no acknowledgement of what had been done. No remorse. Just the usual performance crafted to make me feel like the villain in a story where I was the one who had been quietly robbed. I didn't respond. A few days later, a bouquet of white lilies showed up at my door. No card, no note, just a delivery slip with Lucas's name. Later that evening, a text followed, Mom, please? You're tearing this family apart. I stared at those words for a long time. Not once had he asked why I did what I did. Not once had he said, I'm sorry. Only that I was ruining everything by no longer playing the role he expected me to. I placed the lilies in the kitchen in a jar I used to keep cooking utensils. They didn't belong in a vase. They weren't meant for love. They were a plea for control, disguised as peace. Then came the email from the bank. Dear Mrs. Hayes, please be advised that an attempt was made to re-establish account access by an unauthorized party. Our system flagged it as a breach attempt and denied the request. No changes have been made to your current settings. Lucas had tried to sneak back in, through the side door as if I wouldn't notice. That night, I turned off my phone. 2 mornings later, I heard a knock at the front door. When I opened it, Lucas stood there, tired, tense, and somehow smaller than I remembered. He wasn't the boy I raised. He wasn't even the man I once trusted. He was someone else now, someone caught between entitlement and disbelief. I need to talk to you, he said, stepping forward before I could invite him in. I moved aside and nodded. Come in. We sat in the living room, the same place where I used to read him bedtime stories and bandage scraped knees. I offered him tea. He declined. I made a pot anyway. I needed something to hold. He didn't waste time. Madison's been really upset, he began. She doesn't understand what's going on. You've frozen all our access. You've changed your will. At least that's what the lawyer hinted when we asked for information. He paused, waiting for a reaction. I gave none. It's not just about the money, Mom, he continued as if reading from a rehearsed script. It's about what this is doing to our family. Madison feels betrayed. I poured the tea slowly, gently, letting the steam rise between us like a veil. She feels betrayed, I asked. He nodded, clearly relieved I was speaking again. Yes. She's hurting. And so am I. I placed the teapot down carefully, the porcelain clicking against the tray. Did you think I wasn't hurting? I asked. When I opened a gift you didn't wrap, didn't choose, and watched you give a $12,000 bag to a woman who didn't raise you. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. When I saw my name on a receipt I never signed, when I realized the son I gave everything to had turned me into an ATM. His eyes dropped for a moment. But not enough. Mom. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said, almost whispering. You know how things are with Madison. She handles most of that stuff. I studied him, wondering if he even believed what he was saying. And what about you, Lucas? I asked. Where were you when I was sitting alone unwrapping a scarf with the price tag still on it? Where was your voice when I was forgotten? He stood abruptly, pacing now. This isn't you. You've never been like this. You used to understand. I looked up at him, my voice calm. I do understand. That's the difference. I understand now what I should have seen years ago. He stopped, arms crossed. So that's it. You're cutting me off. I shook my head. No, Lucas. You cut me off a long time ago. I'm just catching up. He stared at me at a loss. He had no script for this version of me. No lines to counter a woman who had nothing left to prove. He picked up his coat, his movements jerky. You'll regret this, he said. But it lacked bite. I walked him to the door. Just before he stepped outside, he turned back one last time. I thought you were better than this. I smiled softly. I thought you were too. And then I closed the door. Not with anger. Not with vengeance. But with peace. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, is to walk away from the person you once loved the most and finally love yourself more. The days began to feel different. Not louder, not fuller, but somehow more mine. I started by signing up for a cooking class at the community center, something I'd meant to do for years, but never made time for. It wasn't about learning new recipes. I already knew how to feed people with love. It was about being in a room where no one knew me as Lucas's mother or Madison's mother-in-law. I was just Colleen, a woman in an apron laughing with other women over burnt quiches and soup too salty to serve. And they laughed with me, not at me. One woman, her name was Teresa, confessed she hadn't spoken to her daughter in 4 years. Another admitted her son only called when his rent was due. We didn't trade pain to outdo each other. We just laid it on the table like ingredients in a shared meal. There was comfort in the honesty, in knowing I wasn't the only one who'd given too much and been left behind. One Saturday, I took Emma on a visit to her dream university. She'd been accepted into a program in early childhood education. As we walked across the campus lawn, I found myself telling her stories I hadn't shared in years. About my own college days, about how I met my husband at a library mixer, about how I once thought I'd become a writer before life had other plans. Emma listened with wide eyes, and that quiet, open heart of hers. She never asked for anything, never made me feel small. She reminded me of the kind of person I used to be before I let motherhood consume every part of me. When we got home, I opened a box in the attic that I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were mementos from Lucas's childhood. Baby blankets spelling B trophies, drawings with crooked rainbows, and my name scrawled across the bottom in crayon. I held each item with care, allowing the memories to wash over me. Then I packed most of it into donation bags. Not because I was erasing him, but because I needed space for new memories. Ones that didn't carry the weight of what could have been. I wrote a letter to Elaine, my lawyer. If anything ever happens to me, please ensure that Emma is protected and provided for. She is not just a name on my will. She is my legacy in action. It was the first time I had written something about my future that didn't include Lucas's name. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. That evening, I stood in the kitchen and realized something strange. I hadn't thought about Lucas all day. Not once. I'd gone a full day living in the present, not aching over the past. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. A few days later, a postcard arrived. It was from Emma. Dear Ms. Colleen, I never really had a godmother, but now I feel like I have something even better. A grandmother in spirit. Thank you for making me feel seen. Loved. Safe. I cried. Not from grief, but from grace. I pinned the postcard to my refrigerator right next to an old photograph of my husband smiling at me from the back porch. Sleeves rolled up holding a pie I had burned, but he pretended to love. 2 people who had loved me for me. No conditions. No cost. I looked at the collage of moments of faces that reminded me love didn't have to come from blood to be real. That fall, I opened a small savings account in a local credit union and named it the Hayes Women Grant. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The grant would provide small scholarships for women over 50 who had been financially manipulated or discarded by their families. Women like me. Women like Teresa. Women who had been told their worth had an expiration date. I kept the name Hayes not because of Lucas, but because it was mine too. A name that had once tied me to a version of family that no longer existed. Now it would represent a different kind of legacy. One built on choice, not obligation. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because everything had been restored, but because I had stopped trying to restore what never truly served me. I was no longer living for the approval of a son who saw me as disposable. I was living for something quieter, truer, myself. It started with a social media post. Madison Ever, the performer, uploaded a filtered photo of herself on a velvet couch. Mascara deliberately smudged a soft blanket draped over her lap. The caption read, "Betrayed by the one who was supposed to be family." When your husband's own mother cuts you off and rewrites the will without warning, how do you teach your children about trust, about love? We did everything right. And still she turned her back on us. Within hours, the comments poured in, but not in the way she had hoped. One woman wrote, "Is this the same betrayal that involved using her credit card for a designer bag?" Another chimed in, "I know Colleen. She was my supervisor 10 years ago when our department almost collapsed. She stayed nights, trained us, and refused a promotion to keep our team together. You have no idea who she is." I didn't see it myself, of course. I had long since deleted the apps. But word traveled fast. A neighbor mentioned it over the garden hedge. The pharmacist at the corner store asked gently if I was doing okay. People I hadn't heard from in years sent me handwritten notes, some with apologies, others with quiet admiration. It was strange watching the truth make its way to the surface without me ever lifting a finger. Meanwhile, behind the curated posts and sad captions, the real unraveling began. Lucas's employer initiated a quiet internal review. The financial department had received an anonymous tip about inappropriate use of personal and family funds. Turns out someone, likely one of Madison's overzealous followers, had forwarded screenshots from her account, showing off their lifestyle complete with dates and purchases that matched the flagged transactions on my card. The investigation found enough inconsistencies to justify a suspension. Madison panicked. Her influencer contracts, which had always dangled by a thread of curated perfection, started falling through. Brands pulled out. Followers turned cold. The comments turned against her. "You can't preach kindness and steal from your mother-in-law." Without Lucas's job or my financial support, the facade cracked. And then a letter arrived. It was hand-addressed in elegant cursive. I didn't recognize the handwriting until I opened the envelope and saw the signature. Victoria Palmer. Inside was a single page. Colleen. I don't know the full truth, and perhaps I never will. But I now realize that I may have played a part, however unintentional, in making you feel overlooked, disrespected, or replaced. That was never my wish. I'm sorry. Truly. Victoria, I didn't write back. But I didn't throw it away either. I placed the letter in a small box in my bedroom. The same box that now held Emma's postcard, a few old photographs, and the will I had rewritten. Not for revenge. For peace. A week later, Emma invited me to lunch at a small cafe tucked between a thrift shop and a bookstore. As we settled into a corner table, the waitress brought us menus with a warm smile. A few moments later, the owner emerged from the kitchen. He looked at me closely, then broke into a grin. "You're Mrs. Hayes, right?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes, I am." He turned to Emma. "Your grandma here once donated the full tuition for my daughter's community college program. You probably don't know that, do you?" Emma looked at me, eyes wide. "I had no idea," she whispered. The owner placed his hand on mine, warm and sincere. "Lunch is on the house today. Thank you for what you did." I was too moved to speak. Just nodded, overwhelmed by the realization that kindness, the kind you give without expecting anything, had a way of circling back when you least expected it. That night I checked my voicemail for the first time in days. Lucas had called again. "Mom, I just want to say I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I wish I could take it all back. Please call me. Please." I sat still, listening to the message fade into silence. I didn't delete it. But I didn't call back either. Some things are better left unanswered. Not out of anger, but because silence sometimes speaks louder than the most carefully chosen words. I looked around my home. The same walls, same furniture, But everything felt different now. Lighter. Clearer. I wasn't erased. I wasn't invisible. I was simply no longer theirs to misuse. And that made all the difference. 1 year later, almost to the day, the sun filtered through the tall windows of the local library's community hall. A quiet space filled with folding chairs and paper programs carefully tucked into each seat. There was no grand stage, no photographers, no decorative archways. Just a simple sign at the front. The Hayes Women Grant, first annual award ceremony. I stood at the back of the room as the guests arrived. Neighbors, a few local reporters, and the 3 young women who had been selected as the first recipients. They sat in the front row, each with hands folded nervously in their laps. One was a single mother returning to school for nursing. Another a woman in her 50s studying business after a bitter divorce. The third a shy girl who reminded me of Emma. Soft-spoken but determined. Emma herself stood at the podium. She wore a navy dress and a necklace I once gave her. Nothing fancy, just a small charm that said hope in cursive. Her hands didn't shake as she held the microphone, her voice steady as it echoed gently through the room. I used to think the only people who could be called family were the ones who shared your blood, she began. But then I met Colleen, and she showed me something different. That family is the person who listens when no one else does. The one who shows up, not for credit, but for love. Some people become mothers, not by giving birth, but by giving everything else. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. Colleen isn't just someone who helped me. She became the voice I didn't know I needed. The hand I didn't know I could reach for. Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain but from something far gentler. The kind of emotion that rests in your chest like a warm cup between your hands. After the ceremony, people came up to shake my hand, hug me, thank me. But the moment I remember most was the quiet one, when the last guest had left and Emma walked over wrapping me in a long, silent hug. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When I returned home, there was a package waiting at the door. No return address. I recognized just a name scribbled in youthful handwriting. Alicia, one of the scholarship recipients. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Mrs. Hayes, I've never had anyone believe in me before. I don't know what I've done to deserve this, but I promise you, I'll live every day trying to be worthy of your kindness. Thank you for choosing me, even when the people who should have didn't. I pressed the letter to my heart and sat in the quiet. There was no ache in that silence anymore. Only stillness. Only grace. On my desk sat another envelope. A final confirmation from Elaine, my lawyer. Everything had been completed. The will. The fund. The final signatures. The life I had quietly rebuilt now had its own foundation. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the old photo album, its leather worn soft over time. Pages filled with memories I once clung to in desperation. I turned to the last page and slipped in a small card I'd written that morning. I was once a mother forgotten. But I was never weak. I chose love. I chose peace. I chose me. I closed the album gently and looked out the window. The garden was in bloom. Daffodils and marigolds swayed in the breeze, the same breeze that used to carry the voices of Lucas's laughter, now replaced by birdsong and wind chimes. The seeds I had planted that winter, unsure if they would ever sprout, were now alive, reaching for the sun quietly, steadily. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch. No phone in hand. No anxious thoughts chasing me. Just this moment. Just breath and light and the rustle of leaves. And I smiled. Not the kind of smile that covers pain, but the kind that rises slowly unforced, like the morning sun over dew. For the first time there were no tears. no bitterness, no longing, just peace. And as the afternoon light faded into gold, I whispered to myself, not with sadness, but with reflection. Maybe Mother's Day was never about being remembered. Maybe it's about remembering how deeply we once loved, and choosing to love ourselves just as much. Have you ever given everything to someone only to be forgotten when it mattered most? Colleen's story isn't just about loss. It's about rediscovering dignity, rewriting your worth, and finding peace not through revenge but through quiet strength. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or learned the hard way that love should never come at the cost of self-respect, you're not alone. What would you do if silence became your only way to be heard? If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel and tapping the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt revenge stories, emotional family drama, and reflections on betrayal and healing. Stories that remind us we're stronger than we think, and that peace is the sweetest kind of power.